Om Aganatimandasya Gana Sarakya Chaksurun Meditam Yana Tajmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yana Bhutare Sayam Rupagaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishikan Vitam Scha Narayanam Namaskitam Naram Chevadanotimam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tito Jehodira Nishta Prayashu Bhadresu Netyam Bhagavadaseva Bhagavadiotamashuki Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki Nigama Kaparu Garitam Padam Shuka Makaramita Dravi Samvitam Pibata Bhagavatam Rashamarya Mahora Hora Shikabubi Vakaham Krishna Sradam Vapagate Dhammiganing Hesha Karonasta Dushamasha Parana Kodunoditaham Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tanamane Namaste Sarasati Devi Godavani Pachadine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Praskata Desatadine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thanks for joining us on Transcendental. Thanks for turning the sound down from our Facebook feed there. Thank you all for joining us on Transcendental Tuesday, coming to you from the Wasatch Mountain Range, which lies just to the east of Spanish Fork, Utah, and the Sri Sri Radha Krishna temple there you see just over my shoulder. We cannot get off this verse, the 40th verse, 3rd chapter, 1st canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're going into our 5th day discussing this verse, our 2nd week. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Parana Brahmasamitam Udamashokacharitam Chakaran Bhagaran Rishi Nisriyasha Lokasha Danyam Shwasti Ayana Mahat. This Srimad Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of God and is compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, the incarnation of God. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. In the 26th chapter, 26th verse, 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, Mam chayo vyavachanayan bhakti yogina sevate sagunam samititatam brahmavoya kalpate. Those who are engaged undeviatingly, uninterruptedly, and unmotivatedly in my devotional service through bhakti yoga, they transcend the gunas, the ropes that bind all other conditioned souls to birth, death, disease, and old age in this material nature, and they rise to the transcendental level of brahman. Now, that's not to say that the individual beings serve the Lord and then the reward or the fruit of their service is that they merge and become one with brahman. What Krishna is saying here is that he's an individual, we're individuals, we're eternally individuals. It is our dualistic individuality that makes the possibility of bhakti, of service, become viable. And when we elevate to the Brahmabhuta platform, the transcendental platform, we retain our individuality. And as we have been serving the Lord down here on earth, we will continue to serve the Lord in many of the same ways in the spiritual world. The geography of the spiritual world is such that wherever there are these 3 elements, that is the spiritual world. It's not bounded by boundaries or borders, by mountain ranges or flowing rivers. Wherever you have Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the possessor of 6 opulences, wealth, strength, beauty, fame, knowledge, and renunciation, and wherever you have Bhakta, the part and parcel of the Lord, that's the infinitesimal jiva souls, such as you and I, and wherever those jiva souls are connected to the Lord through bhakti, that is the verb, that is the action that the individual soul does in order to reconnect themselves to the Supreme Soul. Wherever you have those 3 elements, Bhagavan, Bhakta, and Bhakti, that's where the spiritual world is. Those who are engaged in the service of the Lord, therefore it's not surprising that the Lord claims when the bhaktas are engaged in serving Bhagavan with bhakti, then those bhaktas transcend the modes of material nature. They're no longer destined for repeated birth and death in the material world. The living beings originally, we're of the same quality as the Lord. The Lord is Sat Chit Ananda. He is full of knowledge, he is full of bliss, he is full of eternity. In fact, he is the full embodiment of knowledge, bliss, and eternity. His body is made of knowledge, bliss, and eternity. Our bodies are made of mucus, bile, and phlegm. God's body is made of knowledge, bliss, and eternity. And we're emanations. We're like little offshoots, little sparks from that fire. So within these material, corporeal bodies, there is an eternally blissful, knowledgeable, shining part of God, a spark of God. Just as gold particles are part of the gold mine, similarly, the living being in his liberated position, serving the Lord with full consciousness and full senses, he is as good as gold. In other words, as good as Krishna. And in fact, there are 5 types of liberation to which one can attain through devotional service. One of them is the impersonal type, which is eschewed by the devotees. But there are 4 other types of liberation which are awarded to those who personally serve the Lord in devotional service. And they involve living on the same planet as the Lord, enjoying the same pastimes as the Lord, having the same bodily features as the Lord, sharing in the same opulences as the Lord. So in a sense, just like the servant of the rich man is as good as the rich man. Does he not drive in the same car as the rich man? He chauffeurs the rich man here and there. So he has the same mode of transportation as the rich man. He lives in the rich man's house. He lives in the mansion, just like the rich man does. He eats the same food as the rich man. And the rich man also, because his servant represents him, and people will judge his house and his stature somewhat by the presentation of the servant, the rich man will make it his duty to make sure that the servant is nicely dressed. Therefore, is it not true to say that the intimate servant is as good as the rich man? So in the same way, the servant of God is as good as God, but that does not mean that you become God, you become one with God, you merge with God. The eternal individuality of the living being is asserted in the 12th verse of the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says to Arjuna, Natya bahum jatuna sham nattum neme janadi baha nat bhaiva nabhishami sarvavayam ata param. Krishna says to Arjuna, never was there a time when I did not exist. So God is eternal. He's full of knowledge. He's speaking this wealth of philosophy to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And he's also blissful, whereas Arjuna is depressed and downcast and overwhelmed by the situation. He's crying tears. His body is shivering. He's dropped his bow. Krishna is cool, calm, collected, smiling, always blissful, never daunted by the circumstances, always completely in control. So unless there's this difference between the Lord and the living being, unless there's this perennial individuality, there's no possibility of bhakti yoga. The impersonalists will serve the Lord and they'll call it bhakti, but they serve the Lord here anticipating that the service will dissipate, the service will go away, and once they've achieved their goal of merging and becoming one with the Lord, throwing their ego overboard, then there will be no more service. Neither will there be any distinction between the individual soul and the Supreme Soul. That's not what Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a total misinterpretation of Krishna's words in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is saying that never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you. So the nor you means never was there a time when you did not exist. And not only is Arjuna speaking to his friend and associate Arjuna, who incarnates with him birth after birth, but he goes on to say, nor all these kings either. So 3 categories. There's the Lord, there's his intimate associates, and then there's the rest of us, and none of us ever cease to exist. The Lord created us. He's an individual. He's eternally so. So the way that he created us was in his image, which is as eternal individuals. Now, some, like Arjuna, realize it. They step into that knowledge and realization and make their lives perfect, transcend the modes of material nature, escape future incarnations in this material world, and go back to home, back to Godhead. However, those types of souls are rare. In the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Manushyaram sahasreshu kastyad yatati siddhai yatatanam visidaram kastyad mam vedi tatpadaha. Out of thousands and thousands of living beings, only one is interested in perfection. Out of thousands who are interested in perfection, only one will achieve perfection, which is to know the difference between the soul and the body. And out of those who know the difference between the soul and the body, only one will know that the soul can never be God. The soul is a tiny particle of God. And out of thousands of such person, one will step forward and engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. The individuality of the two persons, the supreme and the servant, is irrevocably, unambiguously, unequivocally established right in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd out of 18 chapters. Without the separate individuality of the Lord and his devotees, there's never any question or any possibility of devotional service. So the exact translation of this verse is, if one is not, if not is, the gist of the verse is if one is not situated in the same position as the Lord, then one cannot serve the Lord. In other words, to be a personal assistant to the king, you have to have the qualifications. There'll be a job interview. You'll have to submit your resume. You'll have to go and answer questions. And if you're considered to be of the right character of integrity, honest, you have the right non-envious, non-competitive attitude, you're such a person who can serve the Lord without envy, without competition, take pleasure in the satisfaction of the master, then you can be brought on board. And you can drive the same car as the rich man. You can eat the same food as the rich man. You can live in the same house as the rich man, provided you have to have the right qualifications, which essentially is to be free of envy. Natad bhasyate shuro nashashanka yadgatman nivartate tadama paramamara. The Lord himself is free of material contamination, lust, envy, greed, anger. So no one can serve the Lord who is captivated by the material modes of material nature. No one can go into the presence of a Lord who is lusty, greedy, angry, avaricious, hankering after material goals and ambitions. Therefore, one should not serve the Lord, one should not become a devotee or engage in devotional service with material ambitions. They are anathema. You have to put those aside in order to achieve excess in devotional service. Here's a further elaboration of this point that we're making in the 15th verse of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, whereby it says, Sarvendriya ganabhisham sarvendriya vivarjitam asaktis sarvabrikshakta saganam niniretasha. The Supersoul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. Sarvendira ganabhisham sarvendira vivar ashakta sarvabhikshakta nirgunam gunabhukta cha. What this is telling us is that we wouldn't have senses were they not present in the original personality of Godhead. You can't say, well, I have senses, but the Lord doesn't have senses. That's not logically possible. that which produces, that which creates a thing, cannot create something which is more than the original. So the fact that we all have senses indicates that our senses originate from the senses of the Lord. He is the original source of all senses. But having created the living beings, having emanated us from his own personal form, he is then unattached. He awards to us free will to do with our God-given senses what we like. He does not accept responsibility or blame for how we properly use or misuse our senses. Therefore, although he is the origin of the senses, he himself can be said to be without material senses. That means he's not subject to lust, anger, avarice, envy, and greed. He is the origin of the senses, but at the same time, he is apart from them. He maintains all living beings by his energies, but at the same time remains transcendental, detached, separate from the modes of material nature, the master of the modes of material nature at one and the same time, and at the same time separate from the modes of material nature. So if we want to serve him, first thing we need to concentrate on doing is transcending the modes of material nature, conquering over lust, anger, greed, and envy. I heard a story about Alexander the Great. He stopped outside the hut of a sage when he was in northern India, sent his men in and invited the sage to come out and get his darshan. The sage responded to the servants of the king by saying, "I'm busy, tell him to wait." The servant came out and told Alexander the Great, "The sage says he's busy meditating, he wants you to wait." Alexander flew into a rage. He said, "Tell him who I am. Did you tell him who I am? I am Alexander the Great." So the servant went back in and he said, "Do you know who's standing outside your hut requesting that you come and get his darshan?" "It's Alexander the Great." "Do you know who Alexander the Great is?" And the sage says, "Yes, I know who Alexander the Great is." And the servant says, "You dare to disobey his orders?" So, "Yes, because I'm busy, I'm meditating." The servant went out and conveyed this message to Alexander the Great. So he drew his sword, he entered the hut, and he cocked his arm, prepared to sever the head of the sage from his body for insubordination. And then Alexander, once more, he bellowed at the sage, "Do you know who I am?" And the sage said, "Yeah, you're the servant of my servant." Well, that did nothing to calm the lust and the anger of Alexander the Great. He says, "What do you mean by that?" And the sage said, "I conquered anger a long time ago. Anger doesn't control me. I control anger. I'm not a servant of anger. Anger is my servant. But you are a servant of anger. Therefore, you're the servant of my servant." To Alexander's credit, he got the point. He sheathed his sword and made propitious apologies to the sage. So one cannot be a servant of anger, lust, and greed, and at the same time come into the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore it said in the 13th verse, 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, "Trigunya gunya," no, Tribir guna mayir bhavir etad sarvamidam jagat motaham nabijanati na mam ebhyam paramavyam. Deluded, overwhelmed, covered, distracted by the modes of material nature, goodness, sattva, and rajas, goodness, passion, and ignorance. The whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. It is said that if you want to mix with fire, then you have to learn the art of becoming fire. So if you want to serve the Lord, if you want to negate and nullify the causes for repeated birth and death, disease and old age in this material world, then you have to control lust, anger, and greed. That's why the first things that the bona fide spiritual master asks of the disciple are to give up illicit sex, how much anger, how much crime, how much violence is committed circling around this bad practice, this bad habit. Gambling, yes. Eating of meat, no question. Mind-boggling, incalculable violence perpetrated. Billions of animals killed and consumed for their flesh every year. In fact, I think I'll share a poem with you right now. We are the living graves of murdered beasts, slaughtered to satisfy our appetites. We never pause at our feast to wonder if animals like humans have rights. We pray on Sundays that we may have light to guide our footsteps on the path we tread. We're sick of war. We don't want to fight. The thought of it fills us with dread, and yet we gorge ourselves upon the dead. Like Caru and crow, we live and feed on meat, never considering the pain and suffering we cause. If thus we treat defenseless animals for sport or gain, then how can we hope to attain the peace we say we are so anxious for? We pray for it over hecatombs of slain to God while outraging the moral law. Cruelty begets its offspring, war. So in order to get a foothold in terms of conquering lust, anger, and greed, we have to give up meat eating, illicit sex, gambling, as well as intoxication. If you are addicted to these things, they control you. There's no hope for you being sane and sober and bringing these wild horses under control. You'll be bewildered. You'll never understand how it is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead retains his individuality, retains his personality, is the origin of all beauty, all wealth, all fame, all knowledge, and all renunciation. Even in the mode of goodness, even having given up those four sinful activities, which are the hallmarks of the modes of ignorance and passion, even elevating yourself to the mode of goodness, it is still not sufficient to understand the transcendental nature and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So for those who are addicted to those habits and passion and ignorance, there is not a single hope. For those in the mode of goodness, though the mode of goodness is not adequate to help to propel them to understanding, from the mode of goodness, it is a springboard, it is a platform from which one can engage in the devotional service of the Lord and thereby become purified of any residual bad habits. So those who are truly established, not in passion certainly, not in ignorance certainly, and not even stuck in goodness, but who are stuck and addicted and committed to the devotional service of the Lord, they can understand the transcendental, unique, one-of-a-kind form of the Lord. That even though he descends onto the earth planet, as he did 5,000 years ago, as a historical personality, he was the friend of Arjuna, he was in the Yadu dynasty, he was the chariot driver of Arjuna. Still, that form of Krishna had nothing to do with the material modes of material nature. It was unique in all of creation. Ajo pishan avyayatma adbhutanam ishro pisham prakritim shamadistaya sambhavami atma maya. That my form is not generated from karma. Krishna descends due to his own self-will in a form which does not take birth. Even though he appeared so-called the son of Mother Yashoda, son of Devaki, he did not take birth being packed up 9 months in the womb. He appeared through the womb of Devaki, just like he appeared through the pillar for Prahlad Maharaj, just like he appeared in front of Dhruva Maharaj in the forest, as he can appear before each and every deity form in temples throughout the world. He appeared through the womb of Devaki. Doesn't mean he was packed in the womb. The moon, when it rises in the evening from the ocean, primitive people may think that the moon has been born or produced from the ocean. But actually, the moon has nothing to do with the ocean. It only seems like the moon is rising from the ocean. Similarly, Krishna had nothing to do with the womb of Devaki. But he's everywhere present in his super soul form. Therefore, he has the capability of appearing from any part of his creation. Ekopya Shore Chayatam Jagaranda Koti Yakshakti Randantarashta Parimano Chayanantarashtam Govinamadi Purusham Tamahang Bhajami. He is fully present within each and every atom, and therefore he can appear among men, he can appear in time and in space, and at the same time not be bounded or captivated by the dimensions of time and space. When he appeared before Dhruva, this interesting statement appears. 13th verse, 9th chapter, 4th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Dhruva says to the Lord, who has just appeared before him, he was in the heart. His eyes were closed, and he was seeing the Lord within the heart. And then the Lord disappeared. So being shocked, Dhruva opened his eyes to see that the Lord had reappeared, standing before him. And then amongst the wonderful prayers that Dhruva offered to the Lord, we find this verse, Tiryang Nagadvija Sarishipadeva Daicham Machabahi. That means for those who are meant for death. He talks about all the species like snakes and insects and demons and demigods. Parichitam Shadashat Vishesham. These are all coming and going. From higher planet to lower planet, from higher species to lower species. One birth a king, next birth a snake. Due to your karma, Brahmanda, Brono, Kana, Bhagavana, Jiva, Guru, Krishna, Prashadi, Pai, Bhakti, Lata, Bish, coming and going, up and down, higher and lower, good and bad, hot and cold. Rupam Shtavisham Aja Te Mahadane. Dhruva says, but the form that I'm looking at, standing before me, with transcendental vision, Nata Param Parama Vedmi Nayatra Vadaha, my dear Lord, O Supreme Unborn, I know that different varieties of living entities such as animals, trees, birds, reptiles, demigods, and human beings are spread throughout the universe, which is caused by the total material energy, and I know that they are sometimes manifest and sometimes unmanifest, but I have never experienced nor have ever heard or read about the supreme form I behold as I see you now. Now all kinds of methods of theorizing have come to an end. That form that stood before Dhruva Maharaj was not one amongst the 8,400,000 species of life which are existent throughout the universe, having been generated by different combinations and permutations of the modes of material natures. Form is unique in all of creation, one of a kind, not a byproduct of matter. Therefore, Dhruva Maharaj says, now all kinds of methods of theorizing have come to an end. And the only way that you can see that form is by the grace of the Lord, is as a result of having done the kind of service to the Lord that Dhruva Maharaj did. And in the course of that service, Dhruva, who started out with lust, with anger, with material desires, in the performance of that service, he was able to destroy those sinful desire seeds from within his heart. And in a purified state of mind, as a result of extended, prolonged devotional service, he stood before the Lord as Brahman. He had become recategorized in the same level as the Lord, after which time the Lord chose to reveal himself to Dhruva Maharaj. And because Dhruva had completely spiritualized his senses, he was able to perceive the Lord. Premanjana Chudita Bhakti Vilochanena. Why is it that throughout all the millions and millions of creatures and species of life, most of whom have eyes, none can perceive the form of the Lord? Well, our eyes are material. The form of the Lord is spiritual. We can't even see wind. We can't even see mind. How are we going to see the spiritual form of the Lord, which is more subtle than the wind and the mind? But aside from that, you can't see the Lord unless the Lord reveals himself to you. And he's only going to reveal himself to those who are free from lust, anger, and greed. The Prabhupada says here, a living entity who develops the transcendental qualities found in the Lord receives immeasurable benefit and eventually goes with the Lord back to his own abode, where all living beings are liberated and fully endowed with the transcendental nature. So the tried and sure method of transcending birth, death, disease, and old age, solving all the problems of life, conquering over, transcending suffering, is to take shelter of a bona fide representative of the Lord, follow the principles that he gives, follow the prescriptions and prohibitions that he gives. They're not to spoil your fun, but to get you to a much better place, and follow his example in terms of associating with the Lord 24 hours a day, serving the Lord, honoring the Lord by glorifying his name, form, pastimes, and paraphernalia. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is the result, as Prabhupada says it. A living being who develops the transcendental qualities found in the Lord receives immeasurable benefit and eventually goes with the Lord back to his own abode, where all living beings are liberated and fully endowed with the transcendental nature. Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. For some reason, I'm on Facebook Live. I'm broadcasting through Zoom. I checked the microphone was working. But for some reason, as I look over to the side here, to the Facebook Live feed, it's not telling me anything about anybody that's joined me. There are no comments that have appeared. So throughout this entire presentation, I've been a little bit off balance, wondering, are any people out there actually able to see and hear this presentation? Because there is no evidence of it on Facebook Live. A couple of times from Anjali and from Raleigh, a little sort of pop-up came on the screen. But if I were to stop the stream of my narration and look at it, it would have thrown me totally off my game. So they came up and they went down. And I intimated they're trying to tell me that something's wrong. But honestly, I can't surmise for the life of me what's wrong, because I'm doing the things that I do every single day. Open up in Zoom, test the microphone, go on Facebook Live. It says I'm streaming. I'm looking on Facebook Live. But when it normally indicates how many people are joining you or how many people have liked or comments, there's nothing. Nothing's popped up. I can only hope that this session was not in vain. Glorifying Krishna can never be in vain. Even if you're talking to the walls will become purified. The speaker will become purified. And maybe even if you weren't able to join me live, we can take this recording and post it for anybody to access on our YouTube page or Facebook page. There are some questions that I have in my mind, and I'm going to take your leave. Thank you, whoever you are, for joining me. Sorry you weren't able to make comments today. I'll try to figure out what's wrong, and I'll look at your comments to see what it was that was missing from today's broadcast. But in any case, we're lucky that this is not a material endeavor. Had it been a material endeavor, it might have all been a waste of time. But because our purpose was glorifying the Lord, there's no loss, there's no diminution, there's only gain, there's only elevation, there's only profit for everyone involved. So thank you very much for being with me anonymously, and join me again tomorrow when hopefully whatever kinks plagued us today, we'll have those ironed out and reunite again on Wisdom Wednesday. In the meantime, please join me in signing off by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.